Good morning. Hank here at HWH Automotive and Diagnostics. Today we're going to learn a little bit about brakes. For those of you that do mechanic work, you probably already know this stuff, but for those who know nothing about brakes, going to give you some tips and some information so that you kind of know what you're looking for if you taking your car someplace and don't know what the service advisor is talking about and want to make sure that you're actually needing brakes when you do. And I'm going to give you some advice and some tips or some insight on how brakes are done. So here we have the new brake pads. Okay. And I like to use, I'm not trying to advertise BG, but I like to use this stop squeal on your brake pads. And what this does is it allows for a better chemical reaction and seating to the new rotor. A lot of times what happens is your brake pads are packaged with a glue that keeps the material together on the brake pads, and that can rub off on your new brake rotor if the brakes are not broken in properly when newly installed, and will create a film over the brake rotor, and that is one way that your brakes can start squeaking. Here's what the old brake rotor looks like. Get it in the light over here. As we can see, there's definitely a shiny film over it, and some discoloration just from heat. And this brake rotor is not bad. Thickness is probably there. But customers' complaint was their brakes were squeaking, and their brake pads on the front were not super low. But if you're getting brake pads and rotors done on one end of the vehicle, I recommend doing front and rears if you can afford it. Here's what the old brake pad looks like, and here's the thickness right here. Okay. Here's a little education on how the brakes work. You have your brake caliper right here, which these two pistons, when you press on the brakes, press against the caliper bracket right here. You got your pads right here, and it essentially squeezes these brake pads together against your brake rotor, and that's how you stop your vehicle. And that's just in a nutshell. There's other things that go on when you press your brakes, but we won't get into that today. Here's what the new brake rotor looks like, and I'll put each of them next to each other so you can compare. New brake rotor, old brake rotor. Okay. The new one's got the crosshatch on it. Like I said, the thickness is not too bad on this one, but they've got the glaze over it just from, car has 83,000 miles, so not too many miles, but it's getting up there ready for some new brakes. And then I'll get back to you on the rear brake pads and rotors, because from what I saw earlier, it looks like that's really the main culprit for their squeaking. And they complained about the squeaking typically when they are very first getting in their car in the morning time, especially going in reverse. That's when your brakes are cold, they're not warmed up yet, and so they're more prone to squeaking. And like I said, there's couple different reasons as to why your brake rotors and pads can squeak. One more thing I want to show y'all here that we're going to do. And some technicians skip this because they're in a big hurry and they're getting paid a flat rate. So the faster they do a job, the more money they can make. But another way your brakes can squeak, and I'll see if I can set this up for a second. Okay. When your caliper is squeezing and compressing these brake pads, it's pressing against these slide pins right here. These slide pins slide in and out. And over time, these slide pins, they have grease on them. Over time, you know, your brakes get really, really hot and cold and hot and cold. And the grease inside of there starts to break down and dry up and become less effective for lubrication. So they're supposed to slide in and out like that as your caliper is compressing and retracting. Okay, so each brake job I like to pull these out, wipe them down, and then we'll get some grease. Sorry, I had to walk back to the car. Get some fresh caliper grease. This is specifically just for these slide pins. You don't want to put it anywhere else on your brakes. Lubrication on your brakes is not good, just for the slide pins. Okay, and I'll put some fresh, this is synthetic slide pin grease. And when you do this, see how much better that goes? So now your calipers can compress and retract much easier. And sometimes what happens is when these slide pins get seized up, which can happen if they're not lubricated properly whenever brakes are done, or if you go too long without doing your brakes, they'll become seized up. So your caliper will compress and it will have trouble retracting, and what'll happen is your brake pads won't fully retract from the rotor and they'll just be barely touching the rotor. And over time, you're driving, your foot's not on the brake, but these brake pads are just barely touching your rotor. And that can do one of two things, or both, is over time your brake rotors can become warped, which if any of y'all have ever pressed on your brakes coming off the highway or coming from a decent speed, 45 and up, and your feels like your steering wheel is starting to vibrate, that could possibly be from your brake rotor being warped. So it's not flat. It, over time, there's a certain spot of the brake rotor that brake pad is touching just barely enough, and over time rubbing on one spot instead of equally around the brake rotor, and you get worn brake rotors, or warped brake rotors. I can't talk this morning. So it's really important that you lubricate these slide pins really well. And you can see how easily and free this one is. This one right here, it's pretty seized up. It's not bad. I've had some that will not come out at all and have to get new calipers. I can't even get it out. But it's important that you lubricate those slide pins. And that's just one of those little things that doesn't take much time, that I like to make sure and do because it's extremely important when you do a brake job. It's very simple, takes no time, and prevents everything I was just discussing earlier during a brake job. So we'll lubricate these slide pins. I did the top one already. You don't need too much grease on there. And there we go. Now we've got Lubricated slide pins and this grease should last the life of the brake pads and rotors, essentially. Okay, and we'll get to the rear brake pads and rotors next. All right, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you learned something today.